Hello, I'm Jenny Hathorn, and I want to teach you about your heritage, which is your country, America, and the United States. So I'm going to be getting most of my stuff from The Light and the Glory by Peter Marshall and David Manuel, but then from a lot of other sources. So my hope and my desire is that you fall in love with your country and your heritage, because this is your roots. America is your roots, and God put you here for a reason, and we need to find out what that reason is. So we do that by studying our roots. So why do we study history other than that? Here's what Teddy Roosevelt said: the more you know about the past, the better prepared you are for the future. And Winston Churchill said, those who fail to learn from their history are doomed to repeat it. Now, what God said to the children of Israel over and over and over was, remember what I've done for you. Remember, I brought you across the Red Sea. Remember, I delivered you from Egypt in bondage. Remember that I fed you through the wilderness, and I brought you to a promised land full of milk and honey. And I love you. I'm the good father. So our story begins with Christopher Columbus. Okay, I don't know if you know this, but his name means light bearer, and he felt called of God to go and find take the gospel to people that didn't have the gospel. So I'm going to move this and let you see my map. So he was from Spain, well, Portugal actually, and he believed that he could go this way. He didn't know this was here. And he could reach China. Okay, so he had heard from Marco Polo all the wonderful things about the gold and India. He didn't know about any of this, so that was his plan, to go from here, like the 28th parallel, which is right here, and keep going and get to right here. Okay, he just didn't know about this. So, and he wanted to take Christianity and the love of God to the pagan people in China and Japan and India. So, just like Israel was the Jews' promised land, America, God set it up to be his chosen people, the Christians' promised land. And he was going to use America to reach the world with help, with the gospel. That we sent more missionaries than any other nation. We have helped nations that are starving. We have just been a light to the nations, America has. But we lost our way around the 60s. Our president got assassinated. It was just a hard, from then on, we have just gone this downhill road, and now they're trying to erase your history. So that is why I'm here to tell you it, so they won't erase it and they won't take your roots from you, because you are an American. Okay, so all right, so Christopher Columbus felt like God had called him to go and find, his name means Christ bearer. He was going to bear Christ to these people. And he also went for gold. I'll just tell you the truth. Okay, when he was really young, he worked with his grandfather, had passed down his business to his father, and he was passing it down to him. And he would card wool, which means that you get wool from the sheep, and then you divide it into strands and wrap it around a card so they can use it for thread. Well, that was great for his father and for his grandfather, but that's not what Christopher Columbus wanted to do. He wanted to sail. So he actually did sail, him and his brother, a lot in the Mediterranean Sea, which is right here. This is the Mediterranean Sea, all this. And at that time, there was pirates, there was warships, so he learned really hard lessons out there in the sea, but he loved it, and God was preparing him for his mission in life, because we all have a mission. It might not be as big as discovering a new land, but every day we have a mission, don't we? Okay, so he got married, and they had a son. And I don't know what happened to his wife. I don't know whether she died in childbirth, because I couldn't find that anywhere. That's what happened to a lot of young women that had children. So she might have died in childbirth, but he was left as with a son to raise all by himself. Well, he and his brother became map makers. So all the people, the sailors that came in from sailing, like, okay, I'm going to show you this map because this is a little bit easier to see. But so here he is over in Portugal, and this is the Mediterranean Sea, and they would go out sailing, and they would go to like the Azores Islands and go, oh, there's these islands out here, and they were map makers. So they would have to redraw the map and put those islands. Well, then another ship might come in saying, oh, we found these islands down here. We're going to call them the Canary Islands because they have canaries. And so they would have to redraw the map. So they were constantly redrawing maps. But Christopher Columbus wanted to sail. He wanted to go find new places, not write down what everybody else had told him, that they saw. He wanted to experience it for himself. So he has this God-given desire to go and find this travel that way that had never been traveled before. So I need to tell you that. Before, like, they would go down around Africa to get there. But nobody had ever gone that way because they believed that the biggest thought of the day was that if you keep going, you're just going to fall off because the world is not round. They didn't understand that. Christopher Columbus realized, and a lot of people that sailed realized, it's got to be round. The world has got to be round. So he would actually do his maps in a circle instead of a square map because he was trying to prove a point. Well, everybody thought he was nuts. All through his life, people tried to discredit what he thought and make fun of him for wanting to think the world was round and wanted to go find a new way to get to India. So anyway, he decided he would go to the King of Portugal, which was King John II, and ask him if he would fund his mission to India straight across. Well, he listened to him. He had no money. And he goes, no, that's ridiculous. I don't have the money, and I'm not funding you to do some crazy, act and get killed in the sea. Because they called the sea, they called it the Sea of Darkness because they didn't know what was out there. It was just dark to them, scary, very scary. They believed demons were out there, Very superstitious people. Well, so he decided, since the King of Portugal won't let me go, I'll go to Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain and ask them if they will listen to me, my plea. So he takes his proposal to them, and Queen Isabella really liked him, but they were in the middle of the Spanish Inquisition, which was all these holy wars against the Moors. And so they were busy fighting. They didn't have time or money to be funding some ridiculous trip across a water that might not, bring anything. So the battle with the Moors lasted for 2 years. In the meantime, Christopher Columbus was getting poor. He was getting very discouraged, and he had this son, so he couldn't go out on voyages. So he goes to a little small port called Palos, and he takes his son, and they're starving. So he goes up, finds a convent, and he goes to the convent door, and he raps on the door and says, can you please spare some food and water for my son, because he's starving. And the doorkeeper that let him in really liked him and just really saw that there was something about this man that he needed to hear his story. So he, of course, brought him in and fed him, and that night they stayed up really late talking about Christopher Columbus's mandate to go to this island, and I mean not this island, but to go and explore new lands and to take the Christianity over there. And they dealt with a lot of things like, why are you going? What's your motive? And he also wanted gold because Marco Polo came back with all this gold. So he had two ulterior motives. So he worked with him on his motives, and he said, if God wants you to go, then why don't you do it his way instead of trying to do it your way? And he thought, yes, let's do this. Well, he repented, and they had communion that night. And the gatekeeper said, you know, I have a friend that is really close to the king and the queen, and so I'm going to send him a letter, and I want you to take this letter to him, and he will get you an audience with them. And so Christopher Columbus is like, oh, that's awesome. So he does. He takes the letter to them. Well, they're busy with their war, but they send him to their counselors to listen to what his story. Well, his counselors listened to it and said, this is a bunch of bunk. This is ridiculous. No, this is crazy, and we're not going to give you the money. So once again, he's turned down, and for 7 long years, he stays waiting. He stays with that convent, waiting for Queen Isabella to have a change of heart and King Ferdinand, because he felt in his heart that they were the ones that were supposed to send him. So sure enough, he is about to leave. He's just about had it. And it just so happened that they had won the Inquisition the day before, and Queen Isabella remembered Columbus and said, you know, I want to do something to thank God for helping us win this war, so I'm going to send Columbus to find his new world and to take the gospel with him. What thing can I do for God than to send a missionary out to? So they call him in, and they go, look, we want to fund you. And they found 2 very wealthy men that were sailors, and they said, yes, we wouldn't want to give some money for this. So they gave him, he needed $1 million. Okay, God will never ask you to do something that you can do or that's possible. He will only ask you to do the impossible, and then he will put a burden in you that's so strong you won't be able to give it up. And that's what Christopher had. Not a penny in his pocket, and yet he needed $1 million to do what God had called him to do, and he got it. So he starts out, and he's got this crew, and they make it as far as, so they start here, come around here, and come down here. When they're leaving, the Jews are being persecuted and driven out of Spain the very day that Christopher Columbus left. So everybody's being sent out. They're being kicked out. He's being sent out. Okay, so he goes down here, and by the time he gets to the Canary Islands, which was as far as anybody had ever gone, it was 300 miles, he had lost a rudder, and he needed a new sail. And his men were scared to death. They were ready to turn around and go back, because nobody had ever gone this far, and they'd already traveled over a month, and it was scary. They were scared. They were crying like babies. These sailors, these mean, big old tough sailors were crying, saying, we don't want to go. But Christopher Columbus knew he had a mandate from God. And so he said, okay, look, here's the deal. If you'll just keep sailing and you sail 3 days, and if we don't have a sign, then we'll turn around. But I want you to give me 12. So they sailed 3 days, and all of a sudden, it's like during those times, the wind carried them so far in one day. They had never traveled that fast or that far in 3 days. Well, you would think that would be a sign that, hey, this is God pushing you, trying to get you so far that you can't turn around. But no, they are scared to death, and they want to throw Columbus overboard and go home. But Christopher Columbus knows he's got a mandate from heaven, and he prays and he prays and he prays, and he remembered this story they had, and I'm gonna have to use my book to look at it because I don't want to get it wrong. And it was about a man named Christopher. And this Christopher. Okay, look. Let me turn back. Find it. Okay. He wanted to know Jesus. So he finally so to know him, he thought he had to please him. And so he lived as a hermit right next to this river that had really swift rapids. And so he would, when people would come, there was no way to get across it, no bridge. He would literally carry them, and he had this stick that he would use to anchor him as he carried them on his shoulders across this river. Well, one night, he was asleep in his hut, and he was awakened by the voice of a really small boy, and asking him to be carried across this river. So Christopher shouldered this little boy, and they went into the river, but they got farther and farther into the current, and the burden grew so heavy until it seems like he was carrying the whole world on his back, which is exactly what Christopher Columbus was thinking that very night. And all he could do to keep, it was all he could do to keep from going under. When he finally reached the far bank, he felt exhausted on the ground, gasping for breath and wondering to himself what just happened. And this is what the little boy said to him: "Marvel not, Christopher, for indeed you have borne the world on your back, and him who created it. I am the Christ, whom you serve by doing good. And as a proof, plant your staff by your hut, and in the morning it'll be covered with blossoms and fruit." And it was. Okay, that was a legend. Who knows if it's true or not, but that story just happened to have his name in it, and he knew that story. And that night, that was his encouragement. So he kept going, and when they wanted to kill him and turn around, he kept on going, "No, we're not doing it," and just literally stood up saying, "No, we're not turning around. We're going to keep going." And sure enough, they kept going, and on the 11th day, they needed some hope. They see these birds flying. Well, where do birds come from? They come from land. Remember Noah? Okay, so they see birds flying. Oh, great sign. That's enough. You know, he's got one more day to prove that we're not turning around. And then they found a branch with red berries on it floating in the water, which has to come from a tree. And isn't it interesting that Christ is the branch and the berries, probably the blood? So anyway, just signs to encourage him. And then they found a cane. Now think of the story about the man with the cane that carried him across the river. And this cane had been like etched out by a man. So they knew there are people. We are fixing to find people. So they were all encouraged, and now they're all looking for land. And he said, the first one to find land, I'm going to give all this money to, and I'm going to give a red coat. And so everybody is pumped now. He's got his men pumped. And sure enough, at 2 o'clock in the morning, they sight land, and they blow this one of the ships sights land, and they actually saw light, like going up and down, like somebody's carrying a lantern or a torch through the woods, and they were able to see that's land. So they shot off a cannon, and all the boats knew, so everybody just, couldn't sleep that night. And at 2 o'clock in the morning, Christopher Columbus saw America. Of course, he thought he was in India, but he got to America. So that is the end of our first lesson, but I just wanted you to know we are part of a great story, and God still has a plan for America, and He has a plan for you, and He has a plan for me, and it is not time for America to go down. So if you are worried about that, I just want you to know that God is going to take care of us, and America is going to be still a light set on a hill, just like Christopher Columbus was. So may you be blessed today. Okay, bye-bye.